It is 7:03. We're back in open session. The city attorney will be reporting out.
Thank you, Mayor. The Emeryville City Council and the Mesa Board met in closed session on the item listed on the closed session agenda. Regarding item 5.1.1, an update was provided and direction given to the agency negotiators. That's the conclusion of my report.
Okay, and with that, we stand adjourned.
7:03.
Do I have to separate you two? 7:15, I call to order the successor agency regular meeting on July 21st, 2020. Please take the roll call.
Councilmember Bowders.
Here.
Councilmember Donahue.
Here.
Councilmember Medina.
Here.
Vice Mayor Martinez.
Here.
And Mayor Pats.
And I am here. Okay, do I have a motion to approve the final agenda?
Move to approve.
Second.
Oh, okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bowders.
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue.
Aye.
Councilmember Medina.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Martinez.
Aye.
And Mayor Pats.
Aye. Any ex parte communications? Seeing none, now is the time for public comment. Any speakers who'd like to provide audio comment at this time, use the Zoom raise your hand feature, or if you're joining by phone, press *9. All speakers are limited to 3 minutes per speaker. Speakers will be automatically muted at the conclusion of the remarks. Do we have any speakers at this time? Clerk.
I have some raised hands, but I'm going to check in and make sure they mean to be speaking on this meeting. So,
Okay.
And Mr. Mayor, it might be recognizing some of the people raising their hands for the benefit of them. You might want to just remind them this is the redevelopment agency and the regular meeting is coming up next.
So
and they
I
can
will
lower
repeat
their
what-
hands if they don't need them to be up.
this is the redevelopment agency meeting. Do you wish to speak to that, or do you wish to speak to the regular agenda, which will start in about a minute?
Okay, looks like they're dropping off. Let me just check with these last two.
Okay.
Oh, Serena is muted. And Stella is muted. I'm going to lower their hands. And, oh, Stella, did you mean to talk for this meeting or for the council meeting?
The council meeting, sorry.
Okay, that's all right. We'll get back to you. All right,
All right.
Mayor Pats.
All right.
Thank you.
While you're doing that, we'll come back to public comment in a moment if there is any actual. Do I have a motion for the consent calendar?
So moved.
All right.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Bowders.
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue. You're muted.
Aye.
Councilmember Medina.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Martinez.
Aye.
And Mayor Pats.
Aye. Okay, with that, we have no action items. This meeting is adjourned at 7:18. Sherry, let me know when you're ready for me to go for the regular meeting.
Okay, 1 sec.
That's what I'm pausing for.
Okay, we're all set. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to call to order the City Council's regular meeting for July 21st, 2020 at 7:18. Before I call for the roll call vote, I'd like to state for the record that this meeting is being conducted by teleconference pursuant to the Brown Act waivers provided under Governor's executive order in response to COVID-19 state of emergency. During this emergency, City Hall is closed to the public. The agenda states that the public may view this meeting that is being live streamed online and on ETV channel 27 and provide public online comment card for the record by staff. The comment form can be accessed by going to our main City of Emeryville website at www.emeryville.org and clicking on council agendas and videos. There, you will see a link entitled Submit an Online Speaker Card. The public also has the option of participating in tonight's meeting via Zoom and provide public comment during the meeting using the raise your hand feature. And we have people who know how to do that this evening. And that'll be visible on your screen. If you are calling in, press *9. The Zoom in information was provided on the posted agenda as well as via e-notification. All right, with that, roll call, please.
Councilmember Bowders.
Here.
Councilmember Donahue.
Here.
Councilmember Medina.
Here.
Vice Mayor Martinez.
Here.
And Mayor Pats.
I am here. Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the final agenda? I believe the city manager wants to make one adjustment. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 12.4, which was the request to allow us to amend the joint occupancy agreement with the Emeryville Unified School District. Staff is requesting that you take no action on that item tonight, given the governor's directive with regard to return to school or lack thereof. We don't see a need to have that authority right now. We are in direct communication with the school district, and we'll come back to you at a later meeting if that's needed. Obviously, it's on the agenda, and so people can speak to it, and we can answer questions if you have any, but we will be asking that you take no action.
Great. Okay. Do I have a motion for the final agenda? Member Bowders, question?
No, I'll make a motion to approve the final agenda, but to just remove item 12.4 from the agenda. If we can do that, Mr. Attorney.
You can do that. However, there might be members of the public that have seen it on the agenda and might want to comment on that.
That's fine. Okay, I'll move to approve the agenda as written.
Great. Thank you. I'll second it. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Bowders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Martinez?
Aye.
And Mayor Pats.
Aye. Okay. Special orders of the day. I don't even know what month it is, so we were going to recognize something, but because those on hold, we'll move right into announcement of committee vacancies.
So after council takes expected action a little later, we will be down to only one vacancy on all of our committees. That is on the Budget Advisory Committee, the business representative, for a term ending in June of 2021. So, but we always have unexpected vacancies that come up, and my typical practice is to wait until I have a few and then do a new recruitment. But that is not to say that if anybody that is listening to this tonight would like to apply for that, we will certainly accept applications. So other than that, we're all full up for the moment. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Council reports or meetings attended. Mr. Bowders.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mine will just be an advisory that as an update, since we won't have meetings in August, the Alameda County Transportation Commission, the members on the San Pablo Avenue corridor will be having a briefing a week from today with the staff to discuss the next steps for the corridor project. It's been through a first couple rounds of public vetting and input, and we have narrowed down design elements for scoping of a proposal for how to do San Pablo. And I know Councilwoman Medina has been very interested in this. So I just want to flag for everybody that there'll be an update forthcoming.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? I attended the mayor's conference and the Alameda County Housing Authority. I was reelected vice president in what was a shock to absolutely no one. There was some question about the election being rigged, but we'll leave it at that. The mayor's conference, we reappointed member Medina to the Economic Advisory Committee. Again, another stunning upset. I want to just take a moment and say, for a city with a rotating mayor, we have more appointments on mayoral committees for the mayor's council than any other city. So I think it's really quite impressive. You know, there was a committee opening and I'm like, no, we cannot share that out. So you can go to the mayor's website if you want to join another committee, but outside of that. And they were very excited to talk about the Oakland Zoo, probably a little bit too excited to talk about the Oakland Zoo, which is reopening. And so we talked about a lot of other really important things, race and equity and policing and fire, but we spent the most time on the zoo. Am I right in my remembering that, city manager? So, and as an animal lover, that spoke to me, although they have elephants and that's a different issue. All right, moving on, city manager's report.
It's a tough act to follow, Mr. Mayor. Just for the public, this City Hall is still closed. We don't have a return to work date yet from guidelines from the county. However, I just want to reinforce we are still continuing to process all business. The building division is very active and receiving plans and issuing permits regularly throughout the week. Business licenses are still being processed. So despite the fact that the building is closed, the work is still occurring. And I just want to give a shout out to all the employees who are continuing to work really so hard remotely. And you see the evidence of that on your agenda tonight. There's a couple of items from the Public Works Department that have been pushed through. And so I just want to acknowledge that and thank you for all your support from all of you.
Thank you for that. And I it's interesting. I think I was talking to you yesterday how I feel a little disconnected from the people who work at City Hall, because I've had a few phone calls with some of them, but I am not seeing people on the regular as I would used to. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. We're to ex parte communications. Okay, Member Bowders, your hand was up first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple on item 12.2. I had a meeting on July 20th with Welton Jordan and Scott Johnson from EAH Housing regarding their proposal. And on item 12.6, I've had a series of meetings over the last few months with Oakland Council President Rebecca Kaplan, Berkeley Mayor Jesse Arreguin. I've met with Alex Randolph from Uber, Tracy Lee from Lyft. I've received emails that I'm sure some of you have received from the Center on Independent Living, the Bay Area Council, and the International Council on Clean Transportation.
Thank you. I forget who's next. I'm going to go to Member Medina.
Same Z's on item 12.6.
Same Z's. Okay. Make sure that's captured in the minutes correctly.
Okay, Zoo Man.
Member Donahue?
I had conversations with the lobbyists for the Bay Area Council about 12.6 and received numerous emails about it.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Martinez?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I got emails from the International Council for Clean Transportation, Hop, Skip, Drive, and Environmental Defense Fund regarding item 12.6.
So I too spoke to the council, the East Bay Council, and samesies for Member Donahue and Member Martinez. So I think that's the new word for the evening, and I like it. Okay. I have lost all sense of decorum here. Coming back up, we are now to, public comment. All right, I have my little thing to read. So now is the time for public comment portion of this meeting. Anyone who wishes to make comments related to items not on the agenda or on the consent agenda should have submitted your online speaker card by now. 3 minutes will be allowed for City Clerk to read your comments in the record. If you are participating in tonight's meetings via Zoom, please use the raise your hand feature visible on your screen, or if you're calling in, press *9. At this time, I will ask the City Clerk whether we have any comments that have been received via the online comment card, and then I will go to the hands that I see raised.
There are no online comment cards at this time.
Okay, so we had several people earlier. I recognize Serena Wang. So if we can bring her in first, and then Stella Yee, and then Mr. Hoffer.
Serena, go ahead, and you need to unmute.
Hi, I'm Serena. I drive special need and homeless students to school every day before the pandemic. And I don't think there's a way applying text to their ride is going to help the already dire situation. We really need to be thoughtful and not act in haste when making this type of decision. And I'm talking about item 12.6. So it is clear that we haven't kept all the stakeholders in mind when making this type of decisions about this text, and it will negatively impact our special needs students and most vulnerable communities who happens, to depend on these services and have near no means to afford. So I strongly oppose this ruling, item 12.6.
Thank you. Stella Yee was next.
Hello, council member. I'm also a driver for special needs kids, and I want to comment on item 12.6 regarding transportation network company user tax. I just want to say that a great many those special needs and homeless children depend on transportation services to go to school and get food from school. And I know that a majority of them can afford those rides already. And COVID-19 has made this even harder for them to get by. And therefore, applying tax to their ride would just make the situation even worse. So I strongly urge the council members to protect our most vulnerable community by rethinking this proposal. and not text those rights for those kids. That's all.
Thank you. Brian Hoffer is next.
Great. Thank you, Honorable Mayor and City Council members. My name is Brian Hofer. I'm the Executive Director of Secure Justice. And on behalf of the coalition that submitted the letter to you yesterday regarding Councilmember Bowder's facial recognition referral, we wanted to ask you to put a little urgency in getting the staff to return with the ordinance. It's been almost a year. We certainly respect that you have a smaller staff and less capacity than some of the larger cities we deal with. And certainly you've been impacted by COVID, but this isn't really a technical ordinance. This is a political decision. It's either appropriate for Emeryville or not. And so we'd ask that it be given a vote on its merits. Since that letter was submitted, additional stories have broken about the misidentification and wrongful arrests, also of Black men, again. So for some people, this is almost becoming a life and death decision. And we just respectfully request that you give it a vote on the merits. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'll hand it back to you, Sherry. Do we have anybody else looking to speak?
Not at this time.
Okay, we'll call the end of public comment then. And do I have a motion for the consent calendar?
I would like to move the consent calendar, but would like to pull 10.4.
Bear with me 1 second here. Do you want to pull it or just speak to it?
I just want to speak to it.
So so instead of, or do you want to vote on it separately? That was the clarifying question I had.
No, I'll just speak to it.
Okay, well, with that, I will second your motion to approve the consent calendar with the in total, but give you a moment to speak to item 10.4. Is that acceptable, City Attorney?
That's fine, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Okay. And any other council members who wish to speak to it as well. Go ahead, Member Donahue.
10.4 has to do with a recently deceased artist, Joe DiStefano. He was an inspiration to me and my neighbor. I've known Joe for decades, and he was a fabulous person and an inspiring presence and artist to have here at the Artist Co-op. And it pleases me that his wife Diane is donating this work to our collection. And I just think he is an important person in the art history of our city. And I'm pleased to have this on our consent calendar.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak? Otherwise, I'll call for the vote.
Sorry.
Okay, vote on the consent calendar, please, City Clerk.
Councilmember Bowders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Martinez?
Aye.
And Mayor Pats.
Aye. Okay, that brings us to public hearings, which we have none. So action items, 12.1, appointment to the Economic Advisory Committee roster. And I don't think we need a presentation on this.
No, this is just a little cleanup. There was a misunderstanding during the recruitment period, and Mr. Roeder did want to be considered, and so this is just to take care of that.
Cleanup item. So I'm going to go straight to public comment, and then we can have a discussion and vote. So is there any public comment on this item?
No public comment at this time.
And I see no raised hands. So I'll come to the end to Member Donahue because this is his committee for a motion, but do we have any comments from anybody else? Mr. Donahue, would you like to make a motion?
I move approval that we retain Bill Reuter. He is an important component in our city. I'm so pleased he's willing to stay on this committee.
And I will second that appointment to this committee. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Bowders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Martinez?
Aye.
And Mayor Pats.
Aye. Okay, that brings us to 12.2. I think this one we want a presentation for.
me find.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Mayor, I believe Valerie Bernardo from the Community Development Department will be giving you a presentation. I believe you've had a chance to see extensive materials in the packet. I just want to thank Valerie for all the work she's done after jumping in on this project. It's very exciting that it's finally coming to you for a decision. So with that, I see Valerie, and are you doing a share screen, Sherry?
Yes, I'm navigating to it at this moment.
I'll welcome Valerie, and I'm excited to hear this.
All right. Is everybody seeing it?
Looks good.
All right.
Valerie,
Go ahead,
take it away.
Valerie?
Valerie, are you able to talk?
He was unmuted.
City manager, do we have somebody who can step in while we fix this?
Sure, if Mr. Smalley is on the line.
I see him there.
She's here and not muted.
I think she's having connectivity issues. If I can.
Oh.
Yeah.
Chad is here. Shall I put him on?
Yes, please.
I would note that there's a phone number with its hand raised. It may be somebody trying to call in by phone.
Yeah, that could be her.
Find out. Valerie, is that you?
It is me.
Okay, let me get back to your screen then.
Oh, no. Okay, I'm going to have to, the computer is not working, so I have to call in.
So mute your computer.
You need to mute your computer.
Okay. Is that better?
That's perfect. Welcome aboard.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. So good evening, Mayor and City Council members. I'm here bringing before you 4300 San Pablo Avenue, the RFP for the developer selection. And if you could go to the next slide. Okay, just to orientate everybody, I wanted to provide a reference point for where 4300 San Pablo sits within Emeryville. To the west of the site is the CVS. To the south is Bank of America. To the east is the Senior Center, and to the north is Emeryville Senior. The property is located along San Pablo Avenue. Next slide, please. The RFP process has been divided into two phases. Phase one started September 24th, 2019, and responses were due on November 7th. 4 responses were received, and all respondents were determined to have met the qualifications and experience requirements, and were invited to participate in phase 2. Phase 2 submissions were due on April 24th, 2020, and 3 responses were received. Those 3 responses came in from EAH Housing, Satellite Affordable Housing Associates, Baja, and High Ridge Costa. The evaluation panel consisted of staff from the Planning Division and the Economic Development and Housing Division of Community Development, staff from the City Attorney's Office, as well as an outside financial consultant, Libby Seifeld, who has consulted on a few other projects here within Emeryville as well. She is on the call today and will be a part of the presentation to answer some questions on the financial feasibility. As well, I wanted everybody to know that all 3 developers also were invited to call in and be available if there's any questions for them. The 3 proposals that were received were evaluated based off of the firm's experience, staff qualifications, financial feasibility, the quality of the design, and then of course, community collaboration. Next slide, please. Okay. I did want to provide just an update because when we originally issued the RFP, there was a request for the project to be either a senior or intergenerational housing project. However, through the RFP process, we were directed to the UNRUA Act, which is a California law that outlaws discrimination based on a variety of fair housing protected classes, but it does include discrimination based on age. Per advice we received from outside legal counsel, developers who are going to do intergenerational housing must provide housing in a separate building, separate tenant selection process, separate activities and services for each group. This guidance was provided to all of the developers and through a clarification through the RFQ process. And it was advised that if they did propose an intergenerational project, they needed to ensure that they included the requirements related to this law. Next slide, please. So our first developer is EAH Housing. EAH is a local housing developer partnered with KTGY Architects, and they submitted 2 options within their proposal. The first option being a 47-unit 4-story development, and the second option being a 68-unit 5-story development. Both options would target households between 30 and 40% AMI, and is proposed as an intergenerational project for seniors and transitional age youth, or TAY, which you'll see throughout the presentation. Their proposal focuses on, 1, an intergenerational community that integrates housing for extremely low income and very low income seniors and former transitional age youth. It's an environmentally sustainable building with measurable greenhouse gas reductions. It's an economically viable building designed for factory-built modular construction, and it also incorporates a parking structure that allows for the conversion to residential use. And it also has an adaptable building design with cost-efficient floor stacking options. Next slide. Most of the common area amenities are located within the first floor of the site plan, which include a meeting space, community room, laundry facility, bike kitchen, and community courtyard. On the top floor is the community rooftop deck. Next slide, please. The proposal from EAH does include the integration of a vertical parking solution, which allows for the flexibility of the building to morph from a completely residential building with parking to some point in the future to a residential only solution when we're not as reliant upon automobiles. The vertical parking structure is made of metal frame, which can be recycled, and also allows for an increased setback from those neighbors that are along the eastern side of the community. Next slide. EAH proposed the utilization of mass timber instead of concrete on the ground floor level of the project. Mass timber is a renewable resource that reduces the carbon footprint and can also allow for faster construction. It's also potentially less disruptive during the construction process for existing neighbors. Next slide, please. Option 1 of EAH's proposal, which was 47 units, had a total development cost of $34 million. That relates to an overall development cost of approximately $744,000 per unit and a total cost per square footage of $817. Option 2 is 68 units. It's a total development cost of $44 million with an overall development cost per unit of $648,000 and a total cost per square foot of $843. Under both proposals, EAH is requesting approximately $1.3 million in subsidy from the city, and their operating cost is roughly about $11,000 per unit on an annual basis. The debt coverage ratio for year 3 comes out to about 1.26. I did want to note that there was a little concern from the evaluation panel on the heavy reliance of operational subsidy and support from the Housing Authority of Alameda County vouchers program, as well as the State Transitional Housing Placement Plus program within EAH's proposal. The evaluation panel felt that if funds are not committed, since we don't already have an authorization of funding committed to Emeryville, and these funds weren't realized, that potentially could be a delay in the project. EAH recognized our concern and did feel like they were flexible enough to be able to recalibrate their project if they weren't able to receive some of the funding that they were looking for, and would go after other financial resources if necessary. Next slide, please. And then we get to Saha. Saha is a local affordable housing developer, and they partnered with David Baker Architects for their proposal of a 73-unit, 6-story development. Their proposal would have housing units set aside for units for households between 20 and 50% of AMI. That will also be available to very low-income households. Their units would also be targeted to transitional age youth, seniors, and homeless. It is important to note that this proposal is intergenerational-like, but would not be restricted to transitional age youth, homeless, and seniors. Rather, there would be a set aside of units that would be marketed to seniors, and then there would be restricted units for just the transitional age youth and homeless. Saha's envision for their concept is a vibrant, multi-generational community with design features and services to support all stages of life. The concept incorporates universal design, private open space for all units, and facilitates a broader community use, ground floor amenities that could be made available on a reservation basis and be free to the community for meetings, classrooms, as well as special events. Next slide. You should see that there is a site plan identified. Most of the common areas within the site plan are located on the first and second floors of the development. Next slide. The community space includes an independent living classroom on the ground floor along San Pablo Avenue with a separate entrance to the street to support utilization by third parties. Again, they opted that if necessary, they could lease the space to the community for free. That space does have a separate entrance and its own bathroom, so it can operate separate from the actual development. There also was an art maker space gallery located on the ground floor along San Pablo that would be dedicated space for art programming throughout the building. And also there is a community room that would be located on the second floor. It would be adjacent to the garden and open space. It could accommodate a large range of programming activities for the residents, and the space can be subdivided to allow 2 separate activities to occur at one time. Next slide, please. The open space on the podium level is designed to accommodate a range of outdoor activities. It could include community garden beds for residents to grow their food. There would be outdoor seating, a toddler play area, an active area for games to be enjoyed by residents of all ages as well. Next slide. For Saha's development, there is a total development cost of the 73 units at $45.8 million. The cost per square foot is roughly $663, and then the development cost per unit is $627,000. Saha is requesting $4.6 million in subsidies from the city. Their annual operating cost is about $10,000 per unit per year, and their debt coverage ratio in year 3 is 1.29. The evaluation panel was concerned about the subsidy request from the city. However, they did recognize that the request of $4.6 million is in line with what was provided on the last affordable housing development that the city contributed to. Next slide, please. Our third developer is High Ridge Costa. They are a Southern California-based housing developer, and they are partnering with SVA Architects and Wynn Residential on their proposal of a 47-unit, 5-story senior-only development. The units would be targeted to households between 50 and 100% of AMI. High Ridge Costa's concept is a mixed income affordable senior community for those age 62 and over that incorporates 16 on-grade parking spaces, about 4,500 square feet of indoor common space, and a partnership with Life Steps to provide instruction-led education, health, wellness, and skill-building classes for all of the residents. Next slide, please. Most of the common area amenities within High Ridge Costa's proposal are located along the first floor. That does include a kitchenette, a fitness room, a laundry facility, and then, of course, area for the leasing office and their staff. And then, of course, there is a community courtyard on the first level. On the top floor, there is a community rooftop deck. Next slide, please. The ground floor open space was designed on the corner of San Pablo and 43rd Street by creating a pocket park for the residents. The pocket park includes passive shaded lounge area, an area for game tables and group seating on deck paving. There also is a turf picnic lawn area for residents and their pets. This area would be enclosed with porous fencing to allow some privacy for residents, but still allow them to engage with the external community. Next slide, please. The fourth floor rooftop lounge was designed to preserve the privacy of the adjacent single-family residence and provide a balcony view for 43rd Street and the ground floor pocket park. The rooftop includes a community garden with raised planter beds, an active lounge area with an outdoor kitchen and community dining table, and then a turf courtyard for lawn games, as well as a passive lawn area for a garden. Next slide, please. High Ridge's proposal had a total development cost of $22.1 million. The total development cost per unit is roughly $470,000, and then the total cost per square foot is $509. High Ridge is requesting $1.225 million in subsidy from the city. Operating cost was about $6,000 per unit per year, and the debt coverage ratio was 1.21 in year 3. The valuation panel, I will say, was very intrigued with utilization of a less competitive financing source through Cal HFA MIP program. However, there was some concern that the cost of High Ridge's proposal was significantly less than other submittals that we received, and therefore we did find that potentially their financing structure may be a little bit unrealistic for an urban infill development project here in the Bay Area. Next slide, please. So that you can see how the proposals each stack up against one another, I have included a summary chart of a few key factors. Saha did have the largest number of units at 73 and also has the largest square footage per unit. EAH is only including studio and 1-bedroom units in their proposal. Saha has studios, 1 and 2-bedroom units, and High Ridge has only included 1 and 2-bedroom units. Next slide, please. On the next slide, you'll see the breakdown of the affordability levels and the units that are set aside for each special population. Next slide, please. Lastly, you'll have a breakdown of the overall score each developer received and a summary of their financing. I did want to point out that it was a 3-point difference between the overall score that EAH and Saha received. So their scores were extremely close during this process. Next slide, please. The evaluation panel, the Housing Committee, and the Commission on Aging all found that EHA and Saha's proposals were of high quality, and both could be very beneficial to the city. There was a huge challenge in trying to determine which developer to move forward with. However, the evaluation panel ultimately did elect EAH because they did have the highest score, and the Housing Committee and the Commission on Aging also supported those recommendations. I did want to identify that the Housing Committee did outline a couple of top preferences for their site after reviewing both proposals. They did want to make sure that the council was aware that they are looking for a project that had affordable income targeting for the largest group of income categories. They were also looking for affordable targeting for the lowest level of income category possible. And they also wanted a development that had the largest number of units. The Commission on Aging outlined as their top preferences for the site a developer that provided a sufficient operating budget for long-term maintenance of the open area and physical assets. They also wanted to make sure that affordable targeting for the largest group of income categories was important to them. They wanted to make sure there was an incorporation of universal design, and they also liked the incorporation of 2-bedroom units. Next slide, please. Following the Housing Committee and Commission on Aging meeting, there were several questions that did come up from both committees that were forwarded to EAH and Saha. Those questions were, of course, were both developers interested or would be amenable to making any modifications to their proposals? And we wanted council to know that that answer was yes, they would. There was also a question in regards to the intergenerational component. We asked each of them to review what the other one proposed to see whether or not that would be a amenable option that either one of them would or could move forward with. EAH said that if, for whatever reason, state funding prescriptively disallowed or future legislation was not passed that would allow intergenerational housing, that EAH would collaborate with the city to explore alternative means from what they're proposing right now. Saha said that they believe that there are very minimal changes that they could make to their existing layout in order to separate and segregate the different populations within the project. And then the last question I wanted to share was there was a question about the 2-bedroom units. EH, again, did not include a 2-bedroom unit in their design, and the question was raised as to, is there a need, why or why not? EAH said that looking at their existing portfolio, they don't believe that there is a need for 2-bedroom units for seniors and transitional age youth, but would make adjustments to their proposal if it was requested to incorporate a 2-bedroom unit. Saha, however, said that in reviewing their existing portfolio, they show that there is a demand for 2-bedroom units when working with seniors and transitional age youth. And they found that often there are requests for living caretakers, or you'll have a situation where there's an elderly parent and an adult child who is living together, or if you had transitional age youth who could have young children. And those would all be reasons as to why there may be a need for a small number of 2-bedroom units. Next slide, please. So with that, I did want to invite Libby Seifeld to come and speak about some of the financing differences between EAH and Saha's proposal, specifically surrounding the city's loan repayment and the city's share on residual receipts. Once Libby finishes her 2 slides, I'll be available to answer any questions. And then I did want to just remind everybody that the developers are also available and should be on the line if there's questions directly for them.
Valerie, is E. Seifel, is that who I'm bringing in?
Yes, that would be her.
Screen back up.
Hang on. Oh, sorry. Is this working better?
We can hear you if that's the question.
Okay, all right. Hang on. I'm just going to switch to my AirPods from my phone. Sorry.
And then let me know if I'm on the right slide.
Yes,
okay.
That's the correct
Can you
one.
still hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Oh, thank you. Hi, good evening. This is Libby Seifel. Thank you very much for letting me have this opportunity to address one of the questions that had come up as a follow-up question, which has to do with the city loan repayment terms. And this is a review of EAH's and Saha's proposal with respect to the city loan repayment terms. Both developers are proposing a typical repayment structure for a soft lender. So the city's loan would be in a subordinate position to other lenders. And so that's typically called a soft lender position. As such, the city would receive a portion of the cash flow that is referred to typically as residual receipts. That means the amount of money that would be available after senior obligations are met. Those include senior debt like the permanent mortgage, asset and property management fees, and also a deferred developer fee. Both developers are proposing that the project sponsor would also receive a portion of cash flow. And typically project sponsors retain between 25% to 50% of cash flow. That's an incentive to have them keep managing the operations efficiently and generating some cash flow. In EAH's proposal, they propose that 50% of the cash flow would be retained by the project sponsor, whereas Saha proposed that 25% of the cash flow would be retained by them. And then the remaining residual receipts after that share that goes to the project sponsor would be distributed on a pro rata basis between the city and other soft lenders. Could you go to the next slide, please? So the city's share would be based on the percentage of the total contributions by the soft lenders to the project. So for example, if the city loan represents a small portion of the total contributions, and say the state of California, HCD, has a much larger amount, then the city's share is smaller than the state share would be. In this case, and the two proposals differ in terms of what the city loan would be. EIH is proposing a $1.3 million loan approximately in both of their options, and SAHA is proposing a $4.3 million loan. In addition, the city can receive credit for the market value of the land, and SAHA has based their assumption that the city would get credit for a market value of about $4 million for land. EIH did not do that part of the analysis in their pro forma. It's not to say that EIH couldn't assume that, but they did not show that explicitly in what they presented. I would like to point out that because the housing is deeply affordable, the future residual receipts will be very limited because the cash flow is very limited because the rents are limited. According to their projections, EIH is projecting that payments would begin in year one based on a 5% share of these residual receipts, and that generates between $25,000 to $43,000 through year 15. SAHA's payments begin in year 8 because they've deferred their developer fees, so their payments are getting, the residual receipts payments to the city would be deferred until after that developer fee is paid. But they're basing the percentage share is higher because it's based on a calculation that includes land value and a lesser take to the project sponsor, and that's approximately a 28% share. And that's projected to represent about $95,000 through year 15. Obviously, as the funding strategies get refined, this might be treated differently. But that's the current proposal right now. And I'd be happy to answer any further questions or explain this further later. Thank you
for that. Member Bowders has a question. We'll take that now and then.
Yeah, my question, thank you, Mr. Mayor, was on the last slide about residual receipts and the land value capture. I was just curious. I had noticed that in the answers to the supplemental questions staff had sent to each of the developers. And at first, my thought was whether SAHA was thinking that this was that we were actually like giving the property over to them as opposed to a ground lease, and that maybe EIH was operating off of the way we executed the agreement for 3706 San Pablo. And so that was the only discrepancy in the formulas I noticed. And I just was hoping maybe you could explain a little further. What is that common to, if you're ground leasing to a developer, is that common for them to give you residual receipts based on a land value that they're not actually getting anything for other than the ground lease? Like they don't have any ownership interest in the land value. So I'm just wondering why that's the case and why there's a difference between the two.
Right, that's a great question. So first, I do want to clarify that they're both proposing $1 a year ground lease. The distinction, as you just point out, is that they're taking credit for the market value of the land. For different applications, different funding applications, developers will propose different arrangements. I'm trying to make a very complicated story short. But in the case of an HCD application, it would be possible to include within the amount of the what's considered to be the local contribution. So the amount that the city of Emeryville is contributing could include the contribution of the land at market value at $4 million, because the city is actually choosing to contribute that land and discounting it to the developer at a very cost-effective ground lease, at a ground lease that's making it feasible. So in essence, the city gets a credit for that contribution, but it doesn't mean that they're doing anything different with the ownership of the property or anything. It would still be subject to $1 a year ground lease.
I just asked, based on your experience then, how common or uncommon do you see when there's a ground lease in place, and the inclusion of the land value in determining a city's contribution?
It depends on the financing sources, but it's fairly common.
Thank you.
Hey, other clarifying questions? Member Medina?
Sorry, to follow back on Member Bowers' questions, because I'm just still not quite clear. Is it staff's opinion that the difference in the requested subsidy is attributable to the ground lease amount or the land value as a whole?
No.
No.
I don't believe so.
Okay, can you help me understand how the two projects, which are very similar in profile otherwise, if we're comparing EAH option 2 and the SAHA proposal, have such a big gap in the difference between how much they're requesting from the city for subsidy?
That's a good question. So what I would probably say is I think there's some slight differences in how all of their financing sources come to be. EAH had a lot more operating subsidy that they were searching for than we saw in SAHA's proposal. Libby, do you happen to have up with you what the other differences were between their financing proposals as to why there was such a discrepancy in the subsidy?
Well, I think part of it is just how much of rental assistance they would be obtaining from the county. That was a big contributor to it. And also, as Valerie noted earlier, the SAHA proposal has a slightly greater number of units as well, and a slightly different, because they have more 2-bedroom units, there were some higher costs associated with the project.
Okay, if I could just, one more question on that same thing. Do you think that the proposed $1.3 million subsidy from, sorry, my tab's got a choice sitting around right now, for option 2 is feasible? Do you think that is a realistic request for a subsidy, and that if we go with this option, we're unlikely to be asked for a deeper subsidy later?
I would say with the experience that I've seen, that most likely we're going to need to provide more subsidy. I think when you look at the cost of subsidy per unit, while 1.3 million in subsidy would be a great contribution if that's all we had to contribute, I do believe most likely we would probably have to come back and provide additional subsidy. I think about $60,000 per unit is a reasonable amount of subsidy that would be provided on a per unit basis. I say that, but $4.6 million is a huge investment. So, you know, I don't take that lightly.
Thank you. I really appreciate that direct answer. It helps me.
Yeah. All right. Other questions from council members? Okay, we'll go to public comment now, and then we'll have our discussion. So is there any public comment on this idea, on this option, on this topic?
There are no public comment cards, and I don't see any hands raised at this time.
Okay. And so would someone like to start us off on the discussion? Member Donahue?
I like just how the EAH proposal sits on the site a lot. I just think it'll fit in the neighborhood better than the SAHA project. And I think that I really appreciate the planning for disassembling the automobile storage in the future. I think that gives our project additional life to it. So that seems innovative and good to me.
Excellent, thank you. Others? Don't make me call on you. Mr. Bowders, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, this was, we have a great problem. I'm having four applicants, 3 of them are here in front of us as proposals. And 2 of them have been pretty competitively scored. I think Councilmember Medina had some good questions to help illustrate kind of where the choice is. And, you know, my background in working with affordable housing developers, I've had the experience and pleasure of working with people at EAH and Saha in the past. And both companies do a fantastic job at developing projects that meet the needs of low-income people. And I'm really grateful to the council for revising this RFP as we did to make it intergenerational. I think there's we're at real opportunity to do something really impactful here. I really appreciated the Housing Committee's conversation about this. There was a robust discussion about the projects and the variations, and they supported the EAH option 2 first and Saha's proposal second, but they had great things to say about both of them. For me, you know, when I asked the council to support intergenerational housing, that to me is the most critical component of this project, is the success of that as a feature in our community. So I was wondering, Mr. Mayor, if you would be willing to allow me to ask somebody from EAH to join us with permission to speak through the Zoom meeting, because I just want to get confirmation from them that they would be committed. It would be great if we had some legislation that just made it super easy to finance this, but there are other ways to structurally finance, I think, an on-site project that would have TAY units in it. And I just wanted to ask them to commit to the council that if we went with their proposal, that they would see through that vision. Because I know their backup answer in their questionnaire was that if they didn't think it was feasible, they would go with a all senior housing site. And I really, I want to know that that won't be an easy out, that they'll be committed to the vision of transitional age youth being part of this project. And so if that's okay with you, Mr. Mayor, I see Welton Jordan's hand up, so I would love to invite him to speak if that's okay.
Sure, let's bring in Mr. Jordan.
Go ahead.
Hi, yes, thank the council for his time. As Welton Jordan with EAH Housing. To answer the question directly, yes, we would be committed to figuring out a way to get this done. If it's not legislation, then I think, as we stated in our proposal, and I'm stating now, that we would come back to the council and staff to figure out a way to make this happen. I mean, that's always been our intention when we responded to the RFP, and it'll be our intention moving forward.
Thank you for that answer, Welton. So, Mr. Mayor, I would just note that both of these proposals were between the second option EAH had and Saha were really hard for me. I loved both of them for different reasons. I want to just kind of give a nod to a couple of concepts in the EAH design in particular, I think, which is consistent with other things we've done by upzoning the San Pablo Avenue corridor and making better use of this site by having scissor lift stacked parking that can be converted into a future additional housing units, I think is really forward thinking and consistent with the vision this city has as being a sustainable place. Its proximity to the ECCL and the opportunity it has to link seniors and the services they have in need with people who are aging out of the foster care or homeless systems. To me, this is really kind of a visionary project that we're trying to undertake. And so the partner we select is very important. And I'm going to support the EAH second option tonight.
Great, thank you. All right, somebody else like to go? Member Medina.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what my fellow council members have said. We have a couple of really great proposals. I think this entire project conception has been very innovative. EAH's, you know, with the cross-laminated timber and the vertical parking is really, really exciting for those reasons. And I think could be a beautiful design. I am a little bit concerned about the amount of the subsidy being asked for and that we'd be on the hooks for more later. So I do just want to note that is my one hesitation with option 2 from EAH.
Excellent, thank you. Member Donahue? Sorry, Scott, you're on mute.
I do like the EAH proposal and design.
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do also like the EAH proposal and design, and having been through this process, at least at the tail end with EAH on the Estrella Vista project. I really appreciate Member Medina's questioning of the low amount of subsidy out of the gate. But I think even if we, consider like a $60,000 subsidy per unit, I still think that this is a really good project. And I think EAH was a pleasure to work with, and they did have to come back for a couple more bites at the apple. But I appreciated that they started low and they explored all of the financing options that were available to them before they came to the city. So I'm also in support of option 2 for EAH, not option 1, because more units, why not?
Member Bowders, go ahead, and then I'm going to make my comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to add one quick thing, which is something that we should just flag or put a pin in is there was legislation introduced to clarify in tax credit rules and law that intergenerational projects like this can be financed without creating conflicts. The bill was shelved because of all the COVID things and stuff going on. And what I would just suggest is that this city can and should look at this fall at being the sponsor of such a bill. That, like, we actually have such a great opportunity to be like, we're an innovator, a leader. We've done all the right things on this corridor with money and other stuff. And I just want to put a pin in that we could be supportive of this and actually make it easier for us to do this project.
All right. Well, first of all, I want to echo a lot of the comments that the others have made, because that's always the right way to start. And then I want to talk about some of my concerns. Sorry, Vice Mayor is showing her sleeping dog, so it distracted me. Coming back to my thought. So as much as I love the innovative scissor lift parking and the option for it to change, to me, that just strikes me as something that's going to need maintenance and costs over time and represents just an area of concern. When we're talking about the public funds, I'm not so innovative. I like very common, easy things. The second piece for me that made Saha's more attractive, and I say this as somebody who's a big fan of the work that EAH has done and really impressed by their projects. But the other things, I think the per unit cost is a little bit more, per unit subsidy is just more likely to be what it's going to be at the end. I think that, as Member Martinez said, more is better. Their project is a little bit larger. And it's not just larger in the number of units, but it takes a look at increased common space. It takes a look at increased unit size, which I think is some of the reasons for the costs being different. Even their studio units are larger. And so for those reasons, I kind of prefer it over the EEH number 2. Yeah, option 1 was not an option. But really for those reasons. And then I'm also, when I think about senior housing, the idea of a bedroom or a second bedroom is something that is important before people who are potentially going to be in these units for 40 years. And the need for in-home support, which we don't in this country subsidize nearly enough, the way that the in-home caregivers break even, I don't even say make money, is that they end up living with the people they provide care for, whether that's a person with disabilities or a senior who is not as mobile. And so that's why I always have a preference for more units, for more bedrooms in a unit to allow things. And same thing with foster youth. Again, it's a population as they age out, we do not provide enough support for, but that does occasionally come with a child that they are then responsible for, and with all sorts of licensing and funding requirements. While a person can rent a studio on their own and live with 2 or 3 children, if you are getting government subsidies, they need bedrooms for licensing and things. And so for that reason, I like the idea of having some 2 bedrooms available. Realistically, we don't need that many, but even just having a few provides options. Again, remodeling in Emeryville, a senior living complex, presented challenges because how do you update for a senior who's been there 30 years and everything needs to be redone? They don't easily move even to another unit in the same building, although that's much easier than moving to another unit outside of the building. So for those reasons, I'm a little bit more supportive of Saha, but I want to go back to what Member Bowders had said earlier. This is choosing between, this is not a Hobson's choice, this is a Sophie's choice. This is choosing between two ideal things. And if you don't get those references, I'll get a crib sheet later. So, Member Bowders?
Mr. Mayor, I think you make an excellent point, though, about, and something I neglected to comment on, but I want to agree with you about the necessity of multiple bedrooms in some of these units. I think housing
open to that.
Yeah, they have made it very clear that they're open to that, and I think having several units in the building being available. Even affordable housing, properties, if a person is living in their 1-bedroom unit and as they age, to your point, there becomes a need, they want to stay in their building because it's their social community. Having a space where a living caregiver can live in a 2nd bedroom provides that continuity that this project has at its heart. So I think that that's a fair point, and this is not a final design. Obviously, it will go through the Planning Commission process, but they've been open to that, and even if that knocks down the total number of units a little bit, I think it provides greater social welfare. And so I just want to echo and agree with you that it's a Sophie's choice and not a Hobson's choice, and that we should get a little bit of a mix of additional bedrooms in there so that we can place keep for people who move into the community.
Yeah. So again, I think we've had a good discussion on this. I'm happy to take more comments, but I'll now look for somebody to be the first to make a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I would like, as the liaison to the Housing Committee, to make a motion to enter into a partnership agreement and approve the resolution with EAH Housing and have that be for option 2 of the 2 options they provided to the city.
Okay.
I'd like to second that motion and also provide a new metaphor if we need one, to say it's a primary 2008, not a primary 2020 kind of choice.
Samesies. How about that?
Yeah, that's first of all too wordy.
I'm going to go with the mayor's metaphor. I think it's a little easier.
I have a motion and a second, and before I take the vote, I know EH and I think KTGY, I hope I got that correct, are still listening. Please take into consideration what we said about the 2 bedrooms, because you're probably going to get a pretty strong vote here. With that, City Clerk, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Bowders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Martinez?
Aye.
And Mayor Pats.
Aye. And Saha, thank you for your project. If you are listening, I thought that was an excellent project. And, I appreciate that in EAH. Just keep in mind the 2 bedrooms for the reasons stated. I'm doing that to stall time as I go back to my notes for 12.3. The program guidelines for BMR residential units. And who do we have presenting tonight?
That is also Ms. Bernardo, Valerie Bernardo as well.
Great. And Valerie, I didn't say thank you. Amazing job solving technology on the fly. It does not go unnoticed and definitely not unappreciated. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome. Okay. Busy night. So the next item I have for you is a review of our below market rate rental regulations and guidelines. Next slide, please. Okay, so just as an overview, I did want to point out that within our below market rate rental program, we currently have 22 developments that constitute 728 affordable rental units in Emeryville. There are also 12 units that are in the pipeline for development or are already under construction, constituting 372 new BMR rental units. And so in order to ensure that we have consistent direction and guidance that's provided to all of our developers and all of the tenants and those that are interested in living in these affordable units, we felt that it was really important to develop affordable rental guidelines to provide. It should be noted that these guidelines should be read in conjunction, of course, with Chapter 5 of Article 4 of the Municipal Code, and of course, whatever regulatory agreement that has been recorded against the property. But the guidelines are really intended to provide coverage and guidance on issues that are not covered under the municipal code or within the affordable housing agreement, and just addressing issues that consistently developers reach out to us or tenants reach out to us on guidance where there is no specific information that's provided. Again, these guidances are intended to, one, assist developers early in the development process, two, provide households interested in renting BMR units an understanding of what the requirements are, and then three, also to provide oversight to property managers and to monitoring staff related to what monitoring requirements are and the recertification process is. Next slide, please.
Hang on, sorry. There we go.
The document has been divided into 5 sections so that users can easily go to the section that directly impacts them. The first section is introduction. The second is the definition of terms. Section 3 is the guidelines for developers, 4 applicants and tenants, and 5 is monitoring and recertification requirements. Next slide. So what I've done is I've just kind of outlined some of the content related to each one of those sections for developers, tenants, and for the monitoring and recertification process, and then giving you guys some highlights. So within the section for developers, there's a section that goes through what the developer process is, what they need to do related to the affordable housing agreement and conditions of approval. There's a section that discusses what the initial rental procedures need to be, which includes the marketing and leasing plan requirements, what's required for application screening and for that process. There's also procedures for existing units related to wait lists and how they should do upgrades. And then there's a section on reasonable accommodations. Just to highlight a couple of things that came up in those sections of the guidelines is that moving forward, we would be requiring every developer to provide a update to their marketing plan every 5 years. That currently is not required within every developer's affordable housing agreement. Second would be that there's a requirement that they must hold a lottery to determine the priority of eligible households that already currently exist. The third new option on the list would be the wait list. So we are providing specific guidelines related to wait lists. Previously, there were no guidelines that were given. The wait list will be considered valid for a 12-month period. All applicants that are currently on the wait list will be mailed notification on an annual basis that the list is going to be purged and what the process would be in order to reapply. If applicants don't reapply for the wait list and the lotteries and the wait list gets too low, and we've determined that if you have between 1 and 10 BMR units, you would have to have at least 20 people on the wait list. If you have between 10 and 25 BMR units, you'd have to have 50 people on the wait list. And if you have more than 26 BMR units, you'd have to have at least 100 people on the wait list. If you don't, we would then require you to do a new lottery in order to populate that wait list. And then lastly, there would be a requirement related to upgrades to the units. Units are required to be upgraded on the same schedule and to the same standard of quality as applicable to market rate units that currently does not exist within our affordable housing agreements or within the code of ordinances. And we wanted to make sure that developers were clear that they do need to be keeping the units, just like when they're constructed similar, they need to be remaining similar throughout time. Next slide, please. The guidelines for applicants and tenants will include, of course, an identification of what the minimum household size is based on the number of bedrooms, how a household income is determined and how we calculate it. There's a new requirement for financial independence that previously did not exist, how applications are to be processed, how wait lists are managed, and then, of course, what to do if you file an appeal. And again, this section is really talking specifically to applicants and tenants so they understand what the requirements that all the developers are required to comply with. Some of the highlights for everybody is just understanding that we do use a year-to-date projection calculation method. We use this on all of our programs. It's a very common income calculation method. It's very different than what the average person would utilize in order to determine their income, but we do require all the developers use that. We do require there to be 3 months of pay stubs, bank statements, or an employer verification that is provided during the application process or the recertification process. Applicants, this is new, applicants who are considered a dependent on another person's tax return are no longer eligible for a BMR unit. This would, of course, not include spouses that are considered a dependent on a tax return or if the household member has a child under the age of 24 who is also a part of the household. It would not exclude them. What it really is trying to do is prevent people who have children that they're claiming as dependents on their tax returns, and then allowing their child to go moving into an affordable unit by saying that they don't, of course, have lower income. We're trying to make sure that we're really set aside these units for those households that are truly independently financially considered low or very low or extremely low income. And then, of course, it's just so that residents are clear that if there is an appeal that they've requested based on a decision to the occupancy of the unit, developers are required to provide them with a determination letter within 10 days, and that process would also be new. Next slide. For the monitoring and recertification requirement, there's a breakdown of what the monitoring process would be. Monitoring process does include an annual report. It could include on-site inspections. It could include review of tenant files. Records are to be retained for every property for a minimum of 4 years. That standard has been out there for a while. And then, of course, what the requirements would be during the recertification process and how you would deal with tenants who become over income, or if somebody wants to transfer out of a designated BMR unit, there's a change in the household occupancy status, or if there's a change in management. It outlines what those requirements would be. So some highlights from this section include that the city, of course, can issue a monitoring finding if the development is in violation of any of the requirements within their affordable housing agreement. And there would be options for that developer to cure those findings. Of course, records must be retained every 4 years following the termination of a tenant. So once a tenant moves out of that property, those records would be retained for 4 years. And at 4 years and 1 day, they could then destroy them. The recertification process is required to be conducted on an annual basis and should typically be conducted about 90 days prior to the lease renewal process. It is also important to know that sometimes the lease renewal process and the recertification process do not happen at the same time. Sometimes lease renewals get delayed or recertifications get delayed. So I have had tenants who have called before trying to understand why they're being requested to recertify their income, and they did it several months ago. And it could just be that there was a delay in the previous years, and so they're trying to catch up. But every single year they are required to do that. And then lastly, if a property owner or a tenant does want to make a change to the designation of the BMR units, they must obtain approval from the city to make that substitution. The reason we require them to do that is to ensure that all of our BMR units are not congregated on the same floor, in the same corner of the building, that they're sporadically spread out throughout the development, and they're not also all residing in the smallest floor plans of the units within the property. Next slide, please. So next steps, I did just want to say that once we do have approval, we have already moved forward. We have a grant, an MTC grant that was awarded to the city several years ago. And through that grant, ICF International, in partnership with PlaceWorks, was assigned to work on drafting training guidelines for the city to provide to our BMR rental property managers and developers. They're currently working on finalizing, and we should have those at some point next month. Additionally, the city has contracted with Hello Housing to provide annual training to our BMR rental property managers as needed. And they're also, of course, going to assist with the review of the annual compliance reporting. And then I also just wanted to make sure you guys were aware that we are currently also working on revisions to the BMR ownership guidelines. Those already were in existence, but have not been updated since 2013. Those guideline revisions have been drafted, and they're currently under review, and they will be brought before the Housing Committee and that's before City Council later in the fall. I also just wanted to make a quick note to just point out that I wanted to really thank Goldfarb Littman, Catherine Serpo, PlaceWorks, and the city attorney. This work has been ongoing for at least 2 years. So I've only been here for a year, and this work had already been ongoing. And so they've put a lot of time and effort into trying to get us to this point. I'm very excited that we're actually at the point of moving these forward to the City Council for approval. Next slide, please. And so with that, staff is recommending that the City Council approve the BMR rental guidelines and authorize the city manager to make modifications as needed to effectuate their purpose. I will say that we will be coming back before you. There is a placeholder within the guidelines that we provided related to BMR parking policy that we wanted to hold that as a separate conversation with the council. But we will be back to fill in that component and then come back again also with the ownership guidelines. And with that, I'll be available if there's any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you. Council questions? Member Bowders.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Valerie, this was really helpful, and these are really great set of guidelines on the whole. I really want to thank you and everyone you thanked as well for their work on it. I'm really happy to see this. And it's really salient because I don't know about any of my colleagues. I've received not less than at least a half dozen emails in the past week from residents at the courtyards at 65th. All of them are BMR residents, and they've all contacted me about something that I want to ask about how we could address in this document. In fact, the timing is perfect. So the BMR tenants have all been told that they're no longer going to be offered 12-month leases, which is bizarre to me. I've never seen that as a structural practice at a building that had BMR units. And they're told that even if they want an annual lease, they can only get month-to-month leases. So the way recertification works, as you noted, is that they get notice of recertification 90 days in advance. They get a second notice, generally 30 days in advance. And then as soon as they've failed to recertify, they get a notice that they could be at risk of losing their BMR status. There's a process for that. But in a month-to-month tenancy, the lease is renewed every 30 days. It also creates a great deal of anxiety and stress for a BMR tenant because, as you noted, they get confused about the difference in the timing between the renewal of their leasehold and the recertification process. And so it would be really easy to lose track of when they actually become due because they're used to signing a lease every 12 months. And those things are generally on a similar time frame, although you noted, I think appropriately, there are times where that can be, disconnected if there's changes in the household and things like that. And what I'm wondering, you had an interesting little piece at the end. I'm wondering if the part about giving the city manager, authority to do things consistent with the intent of this, to make modifications to this document. I support that administrative authority. And I'm wondering if maybe the city attorney wants to weigh in on this part, or Valerie, if you think we can do this, I'll just leave it open for staff to answer. I'd like to move forward with this document tonight, but I'd like to request that we actually specify in here that BMR unit tenants must be offered and at least have the option to have a 12-month lease. I don't know what the law status is on this, but I think it is very bad policy to forcibly require all BMR tenants to be in a month-to-month tenancy, which means that is stripping them of some of their rights, and it's giving them as little as 30 days protection before being evicted potentially. So I don't know if you have comments on that, Valerie, but I really want to see that addressed in this.
I do actually, and I appreciate that comment. I will say that coming from Atlanta, where you're only allowed to have a 12-month lease, I thought the concept of a month-to-month lease was a little odd. But I will say, in reviewing many of the regulatory agreements and talking to several property managers, there is a mixed bag that we have here in Emeryville. So we do have quite a few BMR properties that do allow month-to-month leases, and then we have some that specifically require a 12-month lease. And the reason for the difference is based off of how that affordable housing agreement was written. And so that was one of the items that I was hoping that we could include in our guidelines. And I think we can have it there saying going forward, for every new project, there's that requirement. I think the challenge is on those affordable housing agreements that do not require it, our ability to enforce a yearly lease is the issue that I was told that we may not be able to do. But I'll let the city attorney speak to that as to whether or not that is something potentially we could go back and adjust.
And before the city attorney speaks to it, just to clarify, so I heard you say two different things. I heard you say some allow the month-to-month and some and not all require the 12-month. I guess my thing is, I get the pre-existing agreements that we have and we may be bound by that. I think that's right. So my question for the city attorney is, we can set a policy going forward that every tenant must be offered a 12-month lease. Can we within the ambit, and you may tell me we have to review each agreement to know this, but can we require that, can we at least have a provision in this document that says, unless otherwise specified by a pre-existing agreement, all BMR tenants must be afforded the option of a 12-month lease. So it's not compelling the landlord perhaps to put anybody on a 12-month lease. They could say our default is a month-to-month lease, but in writing it has to say, should you require or request a 12-month lease, we will give it to you. Could we do that? Because I just hear tenants in the last week at courtyards have all started being told they're only getting month-to-month leases, and a lot of them are freaking out about what that means, and they don't deserve that. And so what can we do is what I'm kind of wondering.
I think the short answer to your question is it's possible, but I really would want to, before I give my advice on that, I think it would be necessary to look at what some of these agreements provide. I think that to be able to provide that advice without having looked at the context of what these what agreements are in play and what those current affordability agreements provide, I would be reluctant to be able to give that advice right now. If that's an issue that the council would be interested in pursuing, they could give direction to the city attorney's office to look at that, and we can circle back with the council with after having done some further investigation into the issue.
And as an alternative, Mr. City Attorney, is it possible to adopt this document tonight for the benefit of getting these in place, but can we give direction that we are explicitly saying with the authority we're giving the city manager, if you find that there is a way to phrase a provision that would authorize us to either authorize explicitly that it has to be offered to people, require it outright as an option for all tenants? Is it sufficient in your opinion that by giving that direction tonight with the vested authority that the staff have asked for, the city manager could do this without bringing this back to us if a majority agreed to that?
Yes, I think so. If the direction is clear as to what the council's direction authority is to the city manager and the direction that they'd like to pursue, I think that you can do that.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, we'll come back to that. Any other questions from council members? All right, let's go to public comment on this and then we'll do discussion.
No online comment cards and no raised hands, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, great. Any discussion on this item? All right, well, I will thank staff for this. I think it was really well done, and give it back to Mr. Bowders to make a motion with that direction, which I fully support. And
yeah, if no one on council has a disagreement with that, what I'd like to do is make a motion to approve the BMR guidelines as proposed by staff. I'd like to authorize the city, in that motion, authorize the city manager to have the authority to make administrative adjustments or amendments to this document consistent with the intent and goals of the document, and to explicitly authorize and give the city manager the authority to make an amendment after receiving advice from the city attorney and whoever else they choose to consult with, outside or otherwise, about having a provision that would require all BMR landlords in the city under the auspices of this program to at least at a minimum offer a 12-month lease renewal to any tenant in a BMR program who may wish to have one, provided that can be legally accomplished.
yes, I will second that motion, and with the request that the city manager report back to us the status at our second meeting in September, I think is reasonable.
Mr. Mayor, if we're able to do this simply on the advice of outside counsel, I wouldn't want to wait. I would just send you an off agenda memo as soon as we can get it done.
And that's fine, but I always like hard deadlines, so.
Absolutely.
Okay, so seeing no other comments, I have a motion and a second.
Councilmember Bowders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Martinez?
Aye.
And Mayor Pats.
Aye. Okay, our next item we are not going to really be discussing. We're going to put off, but I want to open it up to the public for comment on this and afford that same thing to any member of the city council who has any questions or comments. And seeing none, I'm going to move on to, that was 12.4, so we're on 12.5. City Attorney.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll take the staff presentation on this one. If I can ask Sherry to put up the slides.
Where is it?
Great, thank you. So for your consideration tonight is a package of ordinances relating to tenant protection resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. So by way of background, earlier this year in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the City Council enacted a series of tenant protection ordinances. They started by adopting a moratorium on evictions. I'm calling that Moratorium 1 to keep us straight tonight. Moratorium 1 was based in part on the California Governor's Executive Order 2820, which authorized local governments to impose a moratorium on residential or commercial evictions for failure to pay rent as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. Accordingly, the City Council adopted a moratorium on evictions here in the city, which prevented evictions for residential units, commercial units, and also prevented foreclosures by HOAs of their residential owners. That moratorium expired on June 30th of this year. In addition to the moratorium ordinance, the council also enacted rent repayment ordinances for both residential and commercial food establishments. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, Moratorium 1 expired on June 30th. However, the Executive Order 2820, which again authorizes the City Council to maintain eviction moratorium ordinances, is still in place and in fact has been extended a couple of times by the Governor, currently to sunset on September 30th. At your July 7th meeting, the Council directed the City Attorney to prepare a renewed set of tenant protection ordinances to essentially renew those protections that I just discussed. And so this agenda item responds to that council direction. As at a really high level summary, all of these ordinances are essentially reinstating the prior protections that were in place up to June 30th. Next slide, please. So we'll start with the new eviction moratoria, Eviction Moratoria 2. Just like its predecessor, it provides for protection against residential evictions. For residential tenants, evictions are only allowed to protect health, safety, and welfare. The ordinance also guards against commercial evictions for affected commercial tenants who fail to pay rent as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. And then finally, the moratoria also prevents residential HOA foreclosures against affected residential homeowners who fail to pay their HOA assessments due to COVID-19. As with the previous moratoria, the enforcement mechanism for this ordinance would be that a affected tenant would be able to assert an affirmative defense to eviction during any eviction proceedings. All tenants would still be obligated to pay rent. The term of this moratoria would be tied to Executive Order 2820. And so as the governor extends, if the governor extends that authority of 2820, then the city's eviction moratoria would track that. And again, that currently is set to expire on September 30th. Next slide, please. So turning now to the rent repayment ordinances. The first one is for commercial food establishments. This is, again, the same type of rent repayment ordinance as was currently provided earlier in the year. Businesses regulated would be those with $7.5 million or less in gross receipts and had a substantial decrease in those gross receipts due to the COVID-19 crisis. As before, landlords are required to provide notice of the ordinance, if adopted, within 15 days to their food establishment tenants. And before proceeding with eviction proceedings, the landlord must offer the affected commercial food establishment a reasonable repayment plan for any uncollected base rent that accrued during the term of moratorium 2. Next slide, please. The reasonable repayment plan would be for, at a minimum, would be for a 12-month term. The monthly installments may be of equal amounts, or the parties can negotiate for increased amounts over time, provided that no monthly installment exceeds 15% of the total amount of the base rent. And as before, there is a rebuttable presumption that any increase in additional rent would be an effort to recover the collected rent subject to the repayment plan. Next slide, please. Turning to rent repayment for residential tenants, this ordinance amends the Municipal Code, Chapter 40, Title 5. I want to be really clear that the amendments to this ordinance keep in place the rent repayment plan that was adopted in conjunction with Moratorium 1. And so the rent repayment program must still be offered for those tenants who had unpaid rent from the period of April 1 through June 30th of this year. What the amendment does is it also adds a rent repayment program for unpaid rents accrued during Moratorium 2, i.e. July 21 tonight, if the council adopts the ordinances, until the expiration of Moratorium 2, which again is tied to the governor's executive order 2820. And the rent repayment plan would be for a period of 12 months. Next slide, please. All three ordinances are proposed to be adopted as urgency ordinances, which would become effective immediately upon a 4/5 vote of the council. Next slide. And so the staff recommendation is to receive public comment on all three ordinances. If the council wishes to proceed with adoption of the ordinances, that you introduce each one by title only and then adopt them by a 4/5 vote. That's the conclusion of my staff report, and I'm available for questions.
Any questions from the council? Okay, we'll go to public comments.
We have no comment cards and there are no raised hands.
Okay. Before we go to city to questions, can I ask the city attorney a question? Can we make one motion to read all three by title only, or do you want 3 motions for that?
You can make one motion for to read all three.
Okay, so we'll open it up for discussions. I've entertained member Bowders. Any discussion on these items? I will make a motion.
I object to reading them. I object to one motion. I'm just kidding.
No, come on.
It can go down 4-1. That's still hit.
I'm not going to do
Many
that.
breaks as you need, Michael. Lots of water.
Yeah, I was going to say, oh my God.
So I'm going to make a motion that we
Already.
read all three by title only. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I saw Vice Mayor Martinez second first. So roll call vote on reading all three urgency ordinances by title only.
Councilmember Bowders?
I guess.
Councilmember Donahue?
Absolutely.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Martinez?
Aye.
And Mayor Pats?
No. Okay.
All right, here we go.
By title.
An urgency ordinance of the City Council of the City of Emeryville enacting a temporary moratorium on residential evictions and a temporary moratorium on commercial evictions due to non-payment of rent, and a temporary moratorium on residential evictions by homeowners associations with a CEQA determination of exempt pursuant to California Public Resources Code, section 21080B4, and state CEQA guidelines, section 15269C and 15061 sub B. An urgency ordinance of the City Council of the City of Emeryville, amending section 5-40.03 sub E1I of the Emeryville Municipal Code, which requires landlords to provide a repayment plan for rent in arrears to residential tenants impacted by the COVID-19 emergency. CEQA determination of exempt pursuant to California Public Resources Code, section 21080B4, and state CEQA guidelines 15269 sub C and 15061 sub B3. An urgency ordinance of the City Council of the City of Emeryville to require landlords to provide a repayment plan for rent in arrears to commercial food establishments impacted by the COVID-19 emergency. CEQA determination of exempt pursuant to California Public Resources Code, section 21080B4, and state CEQA guidelines 15269 sub C and 15061 sub B3.
All right, thank you for that. And I want to take a moment and be serious, because these three ordinances do cover us in a very difficult time. We've had a lot of loss, economic, but more importantly, a lot of family loss, time quality for people. And so I want to be very thankful to my council members for working hard on these things. I will open it up for a motion on item 12.5.1, as we'll do each one individually, but I do want to just take a moment and have a serious thank you to all of you for these. So do I have a motion for the residential eviction moratorium?
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second on 12.5.1, which is the temporary moratorium on residential evictions.
Councilmember Bowders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Martinez?
Aye.
And Mayor Pats?
Aye. Okay, the next item is 12.5.2, which is the repayment plan for rent for residential tenants.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second.
Councilmember Bowders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Martinez?
Aye.
And Mayor Pats?
Aye. Okay, and finally, the repayment plan for food establishments.
Move approval.
I'll second. We have a motion and a second.
Councilmember Bowders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Martinez?
Aye.
And Mayor Pats?
Aye. Sorry to be a buzzkill on that. I appreciate the work, and thank you, Member Bowders. Go ahead.
Oh, I just had a question. I forgot to ask earlier. We normally do the urgency ordinance with a side-by ordinance, the regular kind. Did you address that? I just didn't notice it. I just might have missed it.
So the reason that staff isn't proposing a non-urgency ordinance is because this is tied to the governor's executive order, which ends on September 30th. Given that the council is August recess, the effective date of the non-urgency ordinance would happen after that date.
Got it. No problem. Thank you.
Yeah, I had that same question earlier, and the city manager and city attorney were right there with it. So thank you for that. Okay, resolution of the city council for qualified electors. I believe we all say nodded and then said John. Is that correct on this one?
I'm sorry, you all nodded and...
So we all say not it and send, sorry.
We're on the ballot measure?
Sorry, we're on the ballot measure. I apologize. I thought we were on the League of...
You are so anxious to get me to vote, and I will happily accept the nomination when we get to that number.
Well, we're not going to let you vote. It's going to go 4-1, and you're going. I think you volunteered for it already in the.
Yeah, I have a committee assignment this year, so I said I would do it.
So I apologize. I forgot the TNC tax. So yeah, nice.
Gina has a brief PowerPoint presentation if you'd like him to do that.
Please.
And I don't believe either of the other cities have acted yet, as I'm trying to monitor that in real time.
Actually, in light of that, is it possible to just take item 12.7 out of order if we've approved the agenda? Or can we just do 12.7 and talk about that?
If
Mr. Mayor, I would suggest that.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the city attorney to respond.
If the mayor so chooses, I think that the council can do that. Yeah.
So without objection, we'll go to 12.7. I don't know that this will kill much time, but
I mean, I could read the phone book.
Yeah.
Please.
Mayor and council.
We could have not read by title only, guys.
There you go. Yeah. All right. Wow.
Well, I think Sherry's trying to get your attention because there was a hand raised.
Actually, no, I was just going to give just the slightest, briefest of presentations on 12.7. You all know what this is. The only thing I wanted to suggest or mention is that the staff report said that currently the conference is still planned to be in person in Long Beach, and that when and if that has to change to a virtual conference, they will give us guidance. That has not happened yet. I think we all probably. Oh, they haven't let me know.
Yeah, they notified committee members on Thursday of last week that the conference will be virtual and the format will be forthcoming.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to pause for one moment because Mr. McFarland or Malcolm McFarland has his hand raised, or their hand raised. I'm assuming this was on the prior item, which we're going to come back to, but can we check in with them?
Yes. Hi, Council. Yeah, my name is Malcolm McFarland, and I wanted to provide public comment on item 12.6, but I defer to you all on when that timing takes place.
Okay, great. So you're okay sticking with us? I don't want to lose you.
Sure am. Thank you.
Thank you much.
Sure.
I appreciate that. Let's come back around to 12.7. Sherry, thank you for checking in on that. So 12.7, I really don't want to make Sherry present on this, but feel free.
No, that was it. That was my whole entire presentation.
Okay, so any clarifying questions? Any public comment on this item?
There is none.
Anybody other than John want to go to this?
Do we have to do a vote, or can we do an old-fashioned nose goes?
Yeah.
I do have one scheduling question I just want to, or issue I just want to put out there because I don't know if the city manager will have an opinion on this. The conference is the 7th, 8th, and 9th of October. And on the 8th, we have both the budget committee and the public works committee scheduled that morning. So in order to facilitate my voting on the items for that day, I don't know what the agenda is yet, but I just want to ask if you anticipate it would be a problem to move those meetings if it became necessary due to votes that day, or if you think we could move that when time comes.
No, we could just, I think you can bring that up at the August special meeting of the committee, or that's a regular meeting of the committee, and we can just plan to reorder the agenda that month. Yeah. I think if you do it in August, that gives us a little bit of time. We can just do it the next week.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Okay, with that, I nominate John to be our voting delegate.
Emphatically second.
Okay. Everybody other than John in favor of this?
Aye.
Am I allowed to vote no for fun?
You are actually, but Sherry, I think you need to do a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bowders?
Abstain.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Martinez?
Aye.
Mayor Pats?
Aye, and I just want to apologize to everybody watching this meeting for my lack of decorum tonight. This is just totally devolved. So we are now back to 12.6, which I tried to skip, then went back to, and then we decided to skip and are now back to. I just felt the need to point that out. So 12.6, and I'm sorry, was it Chad doing the presentation or was it?
I'll be doing the presentation, Mr. Mayor.
I apologize for all the confusion.
No worries. I can ask Sherry to put up the slides.
Had it and now it's gone. There it is.
All right, thank you. So good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm back tonight to talk once again about the Transportation Network Companies TNC tax considered for the November ballot. Under consideration would be a tax on users of TNCs for rides which originate in Emeryville. Next slide, please. So really quickly, by way of background, a transportation network company provides for prearranged transportation services using an online platform that connects drivers and passengers. There are two types of TNC trips. One is a private trip and another is a pooled trip in which two or more passengers are transported with separate fares charged. TNC trips in Emeryville use the public streets and roads and contribute to the wear and tear of our public infrastructure. They also contribute to traffic congestion and air pollution in the city. TNC trips currently do not pay any taxes to the city to offset their impacts. The cities of Oakland and Berkeley are also considering TNC measures for the November ballot. I believe they're being considered tonight. At your June 16th meeting, the council gave direction to prepare legislation for a potential TNC tax measure consistent with Oakland and Berkeley's measure. You first considered that at your July 7th meeting. And at that time, at staff's recommendation, the council deferred any action to tonight. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the tax measure itself. The proposed measure would implement a user tax on trips originating in Emeryville. The tax rate would be 50 cents per private trip and 25 cents per pooled trip. The tax would be collected by the platform and then remitted to the city on a monthly basis. The tax is structured as a general tax, which means that it would only require a majority vote to pass. If adopted, the tax revenues would fund general municipal services. If the tax measure is adopted by the voters in November, it would become effective on January 1, 2021, and it would continue until repealed. Next slide, please. Here is the proposed ballot question. It is the same question as what you saw at your July 7th meeting. I will note that the estimated tax revenue fill in the blank has been filled with a figure of $76,500. I will also note that this figure is different from what is in the staff report and in the resolution. Those figures in the staff report and the resolution are typos, and so I apologize for that. The estimated revenue is the $76,500 that you see here. Next slide, please. In terms of the fiscal analysis, so this is new information that we had promised to bring back from the July 7th meeting. The memo, which is Exhibit B to your staff report, goes into the detailed analysis of how the estimated tax revenue is calculated. This is just a high-level view, but the idea is that based on 2018 data, staff estimates approximately 204,000 TNC trips per year originating in the city of Emeryville. Assuming that half of those are shared trips and half of those are private trips, that would generate approximately $76,500 per year in tax revenue. However, as also noted in Exhibit B, a transportation study has indicated that the Bay Area may average up to 75% more trips than the national average. So if that 75% adjustment figure is also calculated, there's a high-end range of approximately $133,875 in potential tax revenue. Staff recommends that the ballot question use the conservative figure of $76,500 for estimated tax revenue. Next slide, please. So these are actions that the resolution, if adopted, would take. In addition to submitting the ordinance to the voters, it would consolidate the municipal election with a statewide election, direct the city attorney to prepare an impartial analysis on the measure, and authorize the city council to author a single ballot argument in favor of the measure, as well as authorizing the filing of rebuttal arguments. Next slide, please. For the staff recommendation is that we're looking for direction from the City Council. If the City Council wishes to pursue this tax measure and place it on the November ballot, then staff is looking for feedback on the ballot question and the tax measure itself. And then we ask that you consider and take action on the resolution. If the council is not interested in proceeding with the tax measure, then no action is necessary tonight. And that's the conclusion of my report, available for questions.
Member Medina.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gina, for this. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how those estimates were arrived at, and if the estimates that were generated for San Francisco ended up being comparable to what came out of San Francisco.
So the estimates were done. Part of the difficulty in getting this is that the city had. We can't get as accurate data as we could, given that the PUC isn't releasing that information to us. And so the estimates are done based on consultant studies that we were able to obtain. And so those consultant studies were estimating the number of trips that were highlighted in the staff report. I'm sorry, your second question?
Do you know if the early taxes collected from San Francisco are reflective of those estimates? Because I am aware that in San Francisco, they used a different method of collecting estimates. I believe they had Bluetooth sniffing technology to do a more generalized estimate of rise at peak downtown areas. There was a 200-page report prepared for MTC where they showed 8 intersections, and that's what generated, I'm sure the figures many of us have seen, about the 40% increase of traffic due to ride shares. And so I was wondering, since they did use a different method of estimation, if the estimates that they had matched up with the revenues yielded from their tax thus far.
I'm sorry, I don't have that information.
No problem. One more thing, could you go into detail for me about why we were unable to receive information from the PUC about the amount of trips?
Sure. So TNC companies are required to report to the PUC. The PUC holds that data. The city had made a Public Records Act request asking for that data. And the response that we have received is that the PUC would not release them, would not release that data, claiming that it was proprietary information and not subject to disclosure under the Public Records Act.
Okay. Any other questions, Member Medina? Member Bowders.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to ask the city manager, reading about this, there's in the definitions here, the tax administrator is defined as the city treasurer of the city of Emeryville or any other person who may be designated by the city manager. And then it's outlined in the initiative ordinance what the responsibilities of the tax administrator are. Can you answer 2 questions, I guess. One is just how is that similar or different from other tax measures we have in the city? Because I know like the state collects sales tax, right? So we don't have a lot of local measures around tax financing, but just what would be different about this is kind of compared to others is the first thing. And then just what parts of this can be either absorbed or performed within existing staff functions or duties, what new staffing burden would be created, and what other staffing or administrative costs would exist as a result of the measure.
It's currently drafted, I believe, and Mr. Gina can confirm this, we modeled this on the TOT tax in terms of the collection. So as currently drafted, the remittance is done by the platform. So it would be similar to the hotel or the motel to the city. The taxpayer is the writer. So let's just be clear, the person taking the trip pays the tax, but it's collected by the platform and remitted by the platform. So it would be similar in terms of our relationship with the hotels around following up with the platforms and making sure that they are remitting the amounts that they're supposed to. What it would look like to audit those platforms and those trips, this is, for us, I don't know. We certainly could not do that with existing staff. We'd need to hire someone and pay them to help us do that audit to ensure that the amount of tax collected is appropriate. Now, if the revenues are only $76,000, it'll be a cost benefit analysis about spending money to do an audit to collect $76,000. That'd be something that we would probably want to bring to the council to talk about. The question for me comes whether you all will be considering any of the changes that the other cities have been talking about as we're sort of monitoring these council meetings in real time, and they are potentially modifying their measures to do all sorts of things. Once we start looking at more staff involvement in implementation of the tax, we have essentially exceeded our ability to administer.
Thank you for that answer. And my follow-up, you hit on, I was going to ask about auditing, and I think you answered my auditing question. So my last one is, you did mention the other cities considering a number of provisions, and I think all the council members have received letters about excluding youth riders and riders with disabilities, also reducing the rate charged for electric vehicles. And I wanted to ask two questions about that. One is the ease or feasibility in your experience of creating those types of, I can see how it would be difficult to audit that. So just in terms of implementing or administering a program that had those types of carve outs or exceptions, does that make it more difficult or more expensive is the first question. And the second question is that when it comes to, well, let me let you answer that one first.
Unfortunately, probably both. I'm in thinking through, today when we're sort of learning about some of these changes that may be made by the other cities, trying to think through how those exemptions or potentially refunds would be implemented. So, for example, if, and with all respect, these are legitimate policy considerations. So I'm answering based on a very administrative bureaucratic process. If a disabled person were to book a ride and then pay the tax and then make a request for a refund of that tax, a legitimate request for a refund, then the refund request would have to be processed. We'd have to confirm that the ride was actually booked through the platform, and then the city would have to process that refund back to the rider. So there would be a fair bit of administration involved in terms of processing that. If there wasn't an alternative way to just simply have the rider claim an exemption at the time of the ride. And I don't know, we haven't had the ability to think through what that could look like, or whether the platforms would be willing to revise their business model to accommodate that. Those are all unknowns.
Thank you for that answer. And my last question, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for indulging my questions. I understand Berkeley has been contemplating an amendment to have an escalator clause that would include consumer price index, so that the rate of the fee or the tax would be basically subjected to a CPI escalator. And either for you or the city attorney, one, I just wanted to confirm that in a tax measure that can legally be done, that the voters can approve a tax that has some uncertain future increase attached to it, or whether there's a different mechanism by which to do that, and then whether you have thoughts on that.
So in my experience, and I will let Mr. Guina answer as well, but in my experience, Berkeley often will put in the CPI or the PIG, the personal income growth, as an escalator on parcel taxes. This is a little bit of a different kind of tax, but it's still a tax. So I know that Berkeley uses both of those indices.
Mr. Guina?
I think that as long as that is, as long as there is an objective standard of what that index would be and the voters can understand what that potentially is, so that that's identified for the voters as to what that potential increase would be year over year, I think that would probably be okay.
And so do you have any, for either of you, do you have any opinion then on whether that's a good idea to add as a provision or not?
I'm not familiar with the policy objective of putting a CPI on a 50-cent tax.
Other clarifying questions?
No more questions from me. Thank you.
Member Medina, we'll come back to you.
Okay. Yeah. So if it was a CPI adjustment on a 50-cent tax that was, say 3%, if we ended up with an uneven number, would it be rounded up or down?
Depends on what the measure would say.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'd have to specify that.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Member Donahue, any questions? That looked like a no.
No.
Okay. And Vice Mayor Martinez?
I just wanted to check with Christine on the timing. I'm concurrently watching the City of Oakland proceedings, and they're still on their budget. Right. So when do we expect Berkeley and Oakland to vote on their measures?
Berkeley just voted. They're just finishing up the vote call right now. But I can't tell you what the actual text is. Because I wasn't able to follow it that closely. Some of you may have more information. And Oakland hasn't gotten to the discussion yet.
They changed their agenda to move it to the end, didn't they?
They did.
Nice of them. Member Medina, another clarifying question?
No, that's it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Mr. McFarland, thank you for sticking with us. My clarifying questions were covered about the costs to implement. So I'm going to go right to you, and then we'll take other public comment, although I think we've lost most of our public.
No worries at all. And thank you so much for allowing me this time. So, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council, again, my name is Malcolm McFarland, and I'm a community organizer at LIFT. So thank you for your time over the past week, to discuss with the LIFT team concerns related to the specific item 12.6, the TNC tax. While we have voiced our thoughts on this particular item and exemptions related to, as you all previously alluded to, EVs, wave vehicles, meaning, wheelchair accessible vehicles, airport and healthcare rides, we still believe there should be a meaningful stakeholder input process, which includes impacted parties other than TNCs. The community has not had the opportunity to weigh in an informed manner to help thoughtfully craft this tax. The TNC tax still directly affects historically underserved communities, those who are simply trying to get to work, home, the grocery store, medical appointments, will be the most directly impacted, particularly during the COVID pandemic. Now more than ever, people such as essential workers and communities of color are relying on rideshare to get around, in light of public transit cuts. We should not make it more expensive for these individuals to get home or to work safely. The drivers who rely on rideshare to generate supplemental income should not have to see a decrease in ridership, due to demand, to increasing costs in the form of a TNC tax. Frankly, that is coming at the worst possible time. Several organizations such as the Center for Independent Living, Bay Area Council, including environmental groups like EDF and TNCs that contract with school districts, basically want an opportunity to have a seat at the table for a more thorough discussion before this tax creates unintended consequences on those directly impacted constituents. All that to say, I thank you all for your leadership and time, and continuing to ask for I'm continuing to ask for an opportunity for those directly impacted communities to be more meaningfully given an opportunity, for true stakeholder engagement. Thank you all for your time, and we hope we can create meaningful dialogue here. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Let's open this up for discussion. I'm sorry, any other public comment, and then we'll go to discussion.
No other comments.
All right. Member Medina, you were raising your hand nicely, so we'll go with you.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank my fellow council members for allowing myself and member Bowders to work with our colleagues in Oakland and Berkeley for, I looked it up, it's been a solid year now. We even incorporated some input from officials in San Francisco who passed this prior. We have met, I think, at least once a month on this topic over the past year. This has been a long and thoughtful dialogue. We've made 2 TRA requests to the CPUC. I think it is worth noting that the TNCs we're discussing here tonight, mostly Uber and Lyft, have appealed the TNC's current mandate to release this information to us. The reason we're not able to have concrete estimates is because of appeals from these companies, which is very frustrating when we're trying to provide the voters with the highest level of information about what they could expect from a tax. I believe that a TNC tax is a great policy in general. And I think it accomplishes 2 things. It generates funds to offset the use of city facilities. They generate a large amount of traffic in the Bay Area, these TNCs. They do not pay in any way, and they do not even offer full employment. In fact, they're fighting tooth and nail against having their drivers classified as employees. It also disincentivizes use of TNCs as opposed to other transit options, which is important for getting less cars on our street and making our streets safer, more livable, and enjoyable in general. COVID-19 has changed a lot of things. It doesn't change the way that I feel that this is a positive policy in general. I'd like to speak to some of the exemptions that were proposed to us, specifically the electric vehicle exemption, which to me is absolutely galling. It does not align with the goals of this policy, first of all. By exempting electric vehicles, we would not be meaningfully generating funds to offset the impact on our city. We would not be disincentivizing use of cars over other last mile transit solutions. We can make arguments about electric vehicles in terms of climate and carbon output, but overall, people in buses is better than any amount of electric vehicles on the road. And it's also extremely disingenuous the way this has been presented. What we are being presented is not an argument for the climate from billion-dollar companies. What we are being presented is a financial model that will benefit them. TNCs are being required by the state of California to shift their fleet to all electric anyway. Lyft, 4 days ago, publicly announced it will move all of its fleet over to electric vehicles by 2030. They do not plan on having this tax apply to them. So by asking for an electric vehicle exemption, they are sitting there laughing, thinking, if you put this in, we won't have to pay a dime. More or less, our riders won't have to pay a dime for this. We will render you moot and null because of our cleverness. In addition, these companies lease electric vehicles to their drivers, often drivers who do not have adequate lines of credit to lease other places. So they're setting up a financial model that is akin to forcing people to buy at a company store and asking cities to be the ones to require them to go lease a new vehicle from Uber and Lyft rather than using their own vehicle to drive. This is a disgusting ploy. I am frankly extremely upset about it, and I'm glad to see that Berkeley may have removed this tonight. So they are working to create a financial model that will negatively impact the same people they are currently putting millions and millions of dollars in a fight against classifying as workers. In addition, the ploy of having 2 people come in at the beginning of the meeting and speak about driving special needs homeless children to school is one of the most craven examples of political lobbying I've ever seen. If you look at any study of who takes TNCs, it is overwhelmingly young, affluent, well-educated people. These are not charities that seek to provide these services to cities. They might do so for a PR stunt every now and then, but that is certainly not their business model. Their business model is to eat one another until they can pull all of the riders from public transit, and once those systems are disincentivized, have a monopoly, an infrastructural monopoly. I do not think these companies adequately accounted for the fact that I have a severely disabled brother, and so I am frequently in contact with him about his ability to access rideshare. Let me tell you something, it is not a rosy picture, and these are common experiences. They have had many issues trying to provide adequate wheelchair service to their riders. There's rampant canceling on the disabled community who tries to call these rides. Trying to say that they are out there trying to provide disabled accessibility is untrue and pretty offensive. I know I'm not supposed to say that word anymore. When I spoke to lobbyists from Uber and Lyft, they assured me, first of all, the first thing they said is they don't oppose a tax. I find that interesting because what they have done is oppose a tax. They have opposed a tax. First they've said, well, we don't oppose tax, we just want amendments. But in cities where amendments are offered, they're out in force tonight opposing the tax. These are all delay tactics because they know we have a limited timeline to place these initiatives on the ballot. I am pretty angry at the behavior I've seen from these companies tonight. These companies have a long history of jerking cities around. And I dearly wish I could say to you all, absolutely, let's unanimously vote this through. Let's reject all of these amendments and go campaign my heart out and run up the score with 85% of the vote minimum on this year. However, COVID-19 is a terrible disease, and I cannot argue with financial projections before us. For other cities, I think they stand to gain a lot of great tax revenue in a time of need from these measures. For us, $76,000 unfortunately doesn't really cover the cost of putting them on the ballot. Probably doesn't cover the cost of implementation. So I am sitting here full of anger and disappointment. I've spent a year on this. I truly believe in this measure. But my duty is to represent my city well. And I could not ask my fellow city council members to do anything that would endanger the city's financial health, especially at this critical juncture. So I'm really curious to hear y'all opinions, but had to get that out.
All right, let's all jump to go next. Who's interested? Remember
I'll
about
go next.
Rob.
You can't follow that, but I'll go next. I put my ice cream down. I was having fun.
You can't have ice cream unless you bring enough for everybody.
It's banana. It's the best.
Oh.
Yeah. So I'm gonna just say amen to what Ali said. And here's the thing. And this is no disrespect to the public commenter. I mean, I don't know you, Malcolm, but here's the thing. If you're going to come in and say you want the process to be more publicly engaging, okay? As Ali noted, we made multiple requests for data, right? You can have a public conversation when you have data, but your company actually refuses to share data. So that's strike one. The next thing that's kind of interesting to me is you talk about how it's going to impair people in low-income communities. They live in low-income communities and are low-income because you don't treat them as employees. You don't give them living wages. You don't give them healthcare benefits. I mean, you fight AB5. You guys are spending millions of dollars to prevent them from actually being like functioning, like employed, well-paid people. And you flip the script and say, well, this is poor people in the community won't have access to a ride. And so then the third thing, which that's strike two. And the third thing is the model is exactly what Ali said it is. I mean, she's nailed the whole thing. But as somebody who relies on public transportation, I just think it's criminal that, we pay for bus stops as a city. Your drivers inappropriately use bus stops, which, by the way, is contrary to the needs of people who are handicapped or disabled. Right? You guys stop your drivers stop in red curbs and other things. So the idea, it just is incongruent to say all the things that you said and then say we didn't engage in a public process. So I would just share, I'm the chair of the budget committee here, and I have worked alongside Councilmember Medina, and she has been fierce on this issue for a whole year. And I want to just advise my three colleagues who know this, she is very committed to this issue. But as she noted, we had a really hard conversation about the fiscal viability of this, and I have committed day one I would support her on whatever she wanted to do. And so she is doing what is in the best interest of the city. And when she reports back to you that it probably doesn't make the best financial sense right now to do this, and I support what she's recommending. But I just think it's like a joke for these companies. And I enjoyed meeting several of them and hearing about their concerns and their issues. But the presentations that we get from folks at these companies is a joke. You're either seriously interested in the success of the individuals who serve, and riders are paying the tax, right? It's not you paying the tax, riders pay the tax. But you're concerned that that will affect your market viability, as she noted, and so you don't like it. And in the meantime, you're not actually doing anything to lift up these people who have to make ends meet with these jobs. I've said enough, Mr. Mayor, because I think Allie kind of said it all, but I just, yeah, back to ice cream.
Okay. Member Donahue, do you have any desire to speak? I'm sorry, do you have any desire to speak? Not on mute.
Next year, maybe we'll do this if it pencils out for us.
Okay. Thank you for that. Vice Mayor Martinez?
I just want to thank members Medina and Bowders for their work on this issue. And I'm hopeful that at some point we'll see real numbers from these TNCs so we can actually have a reason to put this on the ballot. And I'm happy to support when and if that happens. And, if it makes sense to do a special election, I think we should consider those avenues.
Great, thank you. Going last has its advantages. It's my preferred spot. That said, Mr. Bowders took my question about the cost to implement this program, and Allie covered, I think, everything else except the poor choice of names these companies have. You don't spell Lyft with a Y. You don't use Uber for any name. And Zoom, who handles transportation for students with disabilities, has an unneeded umlaut. So other than that, I have to say this because part of my world has been booking these type of services for kids to get to school. And oddly enough, those students, Emeryville's small. Transportation is not something that would be done through either Lyft or Uber. There are services specifically designed for kids with disabilities. That's what school districts use. And then the district pays it, and the district has a whole thing about paying taxes. So it just gets all the more complicated. I have to say, I have never in my life met a tax I don't like. I'm a big economy busting, pro-tax, pinko commie liberal, whatever you want to call me. Taxes pay for all the things that we need in this society. And if we have learned nothing in the last 6 months, paying less taxes means we have less services, which means we leave more people out in the rain, and we end up in a crisis for way longer and way worse than anybody else other than Sweden. And I just want to pick on them for a moment because they usually look so good. So my mini rant is almost over. I'm not hearing any massive support for this. I'm not expecting to get a motion for it. So I will give a moment for that to happen. City Manager, please.
Mr. Mayor, if the council decides, well, actually either way, but if the council decides not to move forward with this, it is still, I think, a policy objective to pursue the data. And I want to thank Councilmember Medina for staying on top of this. And one of the elements that's challenging is the fact that the PUC initially has said that the data is confidential. And then in their March decision said, well, the prospective data may not be confidential, but the agencies have the opportunity to assert that it is. So to the extent that there's an adjudicatory process at the CPUC, if the council would like to direct the city attorney and I to continue to follow that process and potentially even join in that process as a entity, I think that might be something to just not give up on this idea, but to pursue the source of that data, which right now is the CPUC, or the holder of the data, which is the CPUC.
Yeah. Member Medina.
Thank you, City Manager. I think that's absolutely right. I think that's one of the most important things we can get for our city is more information here. One thing that's been floated is we can throw this on the ballot right now and not implement it until our daytime population rebounds with retail and employment. Because of the cost of putting the ballot measure on, I'm not sure that's going to be wildly popular. I thank you all for your support and our exploration of this, and I hope that we can continue this very much as a policy objective, in the words of our city manager. And I expect, we'll see what happens in November, but I expect you'll be hearing more about this from me in upcoming election cycles.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to officially call this item over because I do not have a motion in front of me. And that brings us to department head reports.
I'm not sure there are any tonight, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. All right. Future agenda item requests. Okay, we've had a very jovial and disjointed meeting, and I want to thank you guys for sticking with me. Member Donahue, I want to go back and second something you did earlier in the evening, and I would like to adjourn this meeting in the name of Joseph DeStefano. I had it written down, Joseph DeStefano. And with
Thank
that,
you.
we stand adjourned.